Good evening, everyone. For Telesur, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. We start tonight in Ukraine, where shelling has been reported in several places despite the official ceasefire. Artillery fire could be heard in Donetsk, the region's largest city, where the truce had been observed so far. The fighting comes as Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany held further talks over the phone. According to NATO, the ceasefire never even began.
So your question to me is, has the ceasefire been broken? My question back to you would be, did the ceasefire ever begin? Did we ever have a ceasefire? I don't think that there was ever a cease in the hostilities in the Debaltseve salient, in and around the town of Debaltseve. The fighting continued from the minute that there was an agreement until now. And so you asked, has the ceasefire been broken? I would tell you, I don't think the ceasefire ever began. It's a ceasefire in name only. And that's why I said earlier that we call on all parties to adhere to the 12 February agreement and allow the ceasefire to begin and for the nations to recover in that area.
British Foreign Minister Philip Hammond says NATO members will remain, quote, resolute and united in the face of challenges posed by Russia. Speaking on a visit to Spain, he said any move by Moscow could be countered by the alliance.
But I think the Kremlin understands very well the distinction between the Baltic states, which are member states of NATO, member states of the European Union, and Ukraine, which, although partners of the European Union, are not members of the European Union, are not members of NATO. And I think it's very important that we reinforce to the Kremlin at every opportunity the red line that exists around the NATO member states, backed up by the Article 5 collective defense guarantee.
Much needed aid is finally arriving in eastern Ukraine, with both Russia and the United Nations delivering 62 metric tons of humanitarian aid to Donetsk. The Russian government is also sending aid to Lugansk, but the amount of aid will only cover a small part of the population's necessities.
It's a drop in the ocean. The needs are great. Right now we're prepositioning food, hoping that the ceasefire will hold and we're able to push food to over 60,000 people near the front lines.
To Latin America now, a new currency exchange system has begun operating in Venezuela, where individuals and companies can buy and sell dollars freely. The SIMADI currency exchange was announced last week with the aim of bringing down the illegal parallel dollar market, which has been one of the key sources of speculation in the Venezuelan economy. It will work alongside two other controlled exchange rates used for importing basic goods and keeping their prices low. The SIMADI rate will be determined purely by supply and demand. The Argentine government says organizers of Wednesday's march to honor the dead prosecutor Alberto Nisman are attempting a judicial coup. The group has frequently locked horns with President Fernandez's leftist government. Presidential Chief of Staff ANIBAL Fernandez accused the prosecutors behind the march of having disingenuous political motivations aimed at dismantling the current government.
Me pregunta por qué nosotros manifestamos si existe.
If you ask me if there's some kind of destabilization, I would say yes. There is the vocation to destabilize because even some of our ministers have expressed this to those prosecutors that organized yesterday's march. We have the obligation of making it known. Not because we are scared or are worried. I think that there are people that should know that these things happen in the heads of these people that don't want to do things seriously and that have little respect for constitutional governments, which are not those that have historically favored them.
And moving to Mexico now, in spite of resistance from the government, the preliminary reports of the investigation into the forced disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students will be made public. Clayton Kahn now with more.
Mexico's Federal Institute of Access to Information and Protection of Data, or EFI, has ordered the country's Attorney General's office to make public the preliminary investigation into the enforced disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students. The EFI overruled the arguments by the Attorney General's office, which said that there's an ongoing investigation that involved public servants who are accused of kidnapping, organized crime, and homicide. The EFI in turn declared that the information in the case belongs to the Mexican society. Now, the ruling comes after nearly 5 months of widespread public distrust and doubt over how the authorities have handled the case. Many have raised evidence that even the Army or federal police participated in the September attack in Iguala, Guerrero, although the Attorney General has denied it. This is Clayton Kahn reporting for Telesur here in Mexico City.
Colombia's Constitutional Court has denied gay couples the right to adopt children who are not biologically those of either partner. The Constitutional Court ruled several months ago that a lesbian woman could adopt her longtime partner's daughter. The implication, confirmed in Wednesday's decision, was that same-sex couples could not adopt in any other circumstances. However, activists say this is only a temporary setback.
It is an unexpected decision. However, for us, it is simply a delay in the process. This isn't going to stop anyone. Equality and the pursuit of equality is an issue that can move backwards. And whether it is now or in a couple of years, we are going to succeed.
And we stay in Colombia now, where the latest free trade agreement approved by the Congress last year threatens what is left of the country's auto industry. Our correspondent Natalia Margarita now with more from Bogotá.
In the wake of the recently approved free trade agreement with South Korea, Colombian automotive suppliers such as Germán Rodríguez company have been struggling to stay in business. Over the last few years, Rodríguez had to reduce his staff from 150 to 110 employees.
How many jobs we could have created if things had been done differently? That is the issue. By now, we could have had 200 to 300 employees perhaps. So the impact's not just about what has been destroyed, but also what could have been gained. I wouldn't have indebted myself to bring new equipment knowing what they have just signed.
Since the opening up of the national markets in the beginning of the 90s, all Colombian governments have tried to appease criticism of liberal market policies by saying that local businesses have to become more competitive. However, such statements seem little more than cynical.
This country has very expensive fuel, very expensive energy. It has the highest taxes and they just raise them even more. They recently signed an FTA and simultaneously raised taxes. It will be cheaper to produce the same we are producing here locally if I just move the factory to Mexico, Ecuador or elsewhere apart from Colombia. What is not competitive here is the country.
Economist Camilo Diaz explains that free trade agreements are not the problem per se, but the conditions under which Colombia has been negotiating them. He emphasizes the need for equal conditions among the signatory countries in order to create mutual benefits. That clearly has not been the case for Colombia so far.
A medium-sized company in South Korea gets financed at an interest rate of approximately 4.5% per year. A medium-sized company in Colombia at an interest rate of between 14 to 17% annually. Therefore, the cost of capital are quite different. Here it is much tougher, much more difficult. And above all, the access to financing is much more complicated.
The recent approval comes as the latest in a series of 13 free trade agreements that have already been implemented in Colombia. For local entrepreneurs such as Germán, it might very well mean the end of their businesses. From Bogotá, Natalia Margarita, Telesur.
The minimum wage in Peru is one of the lowest in Latin America. However, that could change after the recent wave of protests by young workers. Our correspondent in Lima, Raul Mora, explains. Our apologies, some problems with that story. We're going to move on. In world news, Germany has rejected Greece's request for a 6-month extension to its loan from the Eurozone. The German government says that the request from the new Greek government is not a substantial proposal for a solution, adding that it amounts to a request for bridging finance without fulfilling the conditions attached to Greece's bailout program. And for its part, the Greek government has reiterated that it will not accept ultimatums from the Eurogroup. Athens said the Eurogroup had just two choices, accept or reject the Greek request. The defiant stand by the left-wing Syriza government puts a showdown on the table when finance ministers from the Eurogroup converge on Brussels on Friday for yet another emergency meeting. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy says that Greece should pay back its debt, adding that he sees no possibility of success for the new Greek Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras.
There is no chance he succeeds. Look where Greece stands now, forced to beg because a Prime Minister who talked nonsense while campaigning is now leading his country to bankruptcy. We have to tell Greece, which I love for many reasons, including for family reasons, you will have to pay back your debt. You will have to reimburse your debt.
And staying in France now, the government has survived a no-confidence vote called by the opposition UMP party. The vote was called by opposition conservatives in Parliament after the government issued a controversial decree to bypass opposition to an economic reform bill. Some 234 lawmakers voted in favor of the motion, well short of the 289 votes needed to secure an absolute majority in the lower house of Parliament. Current French President François Hollande says his country must maintain its nuclear arsenal in what he termed a, quote, dangerous world. He said that France does not want to let down its guard because the possibility of future state conflicts cannot be excluded. His comments were condemned by the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which argued that instead of easing international tensions, they contribute to making the world less secure. U.S. President Barack Obama has reiterated his call for the world to fight terrorism, particularly the Islamic State group.
In Iraq and Syria, our coalition of some 60 nations, including Arab nations, will not relent in our mission to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL. And as a result of a separate ministerial here today, many of our governments will be deepening our cooperation against foreign terrorist fighters by sharing more information and making it harder for fighters to travel to and from Syria and Iraq.
Now, Obama's remarks came as part of a three-day conference on extremism. According to the Obama administration, stopping violent attacks worldwide begins with young people at home. Our correspondent Alexandra Hall with more now from Washington, D.C.
3 days of meetings between government leaders, the private sector, and civil society to address the global threat of terrorism. One of their conclusions, vulnerable youth are ripe for terrorist recruiting, and it's imperative that community leaders reach them before extremists do.
We must acknowledge that groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIL are deliberately targeting their propaganda to Muslim communities, particularly Muslim youth.
Connecting Islam with terrorism outright would have meant fierce criticism, but Muslim American youth activists still felt ostracized. People like YASMINA, MRABET, who says surveillance and targeting of the Muslim community should have been a part of the debate.
Anytime someone finds out that I'm Arab or I'm Muslim, I get asked all these questions. What do you think about what the terrorists are doing? Why do you think they're doing this? Where in the religion does it say this?
For YASMINA, local communities in the United States bear no connection to groups like ISIS or Boko Haram. Instead, she asks herself why attacks by Caucasian nationalists and other far-right organizations are so often ignored.
There's no logic that would tell you to go from those beheading videos to reach out to Muslim youth in the United States. That's just as shocking and disgusting to us as it is to everyone else in the United States. We don't agree with that. We don't support that.
As the FBI investigates the recent killings of 3 young Muslims in North Carolina, doubts surface about whether they were targeted over a parking space or their faith. Many have asked, what if the killer had been Muslim?
The rising tide of anti-Muslim rhetoric that we're seeing in newspapers and television, and particularly on social media, it really does have a negative impact on young people in America who will spend their lives here.
Hate crimes against Muslims in 2015 are 5 times higher than they were before 9/11, and poll data suggests that Muslim Americans tend to underreport when they've been a victim. Evidence that begs the question, perhaps fighting violence worldwide begins with fighting violence at home first. Alexandra Hall, Telesur, Washington.
The 4-year armed conflict in Syria has affected all sectors of the country's society. Now, as Nashwan Abdullah reports, education, including graduate and undergraduate studies, is no exception.
The Al-Ba'ath Party, in coordination with the National Union of Syrian Students, held a consultation meeting to discuss the main difficulties students are facing.
Today, there are many ideas from the students to develop the academic work. We didn't stop giving the scientific lectures, and we worked to make it better using all the possible means. In Syria, we believe in education.
Our educational institutions have been targeted, whether as terrorist thoughts or terrorist assaults. They attacked architecture faculty with mortar shells, and recently the so-called Islam Army armed group was responsible.
The National Union of Syrian Students is the main link between the Syrian universities. AHMED is an Arabic literary student who sees a big role for this union in helping students.
We need supports, and the efforts are affected due to the armed groups' continuing attacks. Many students were frightened and flee out the country, but the majority stayed, and we will work together to build the country again.
The Syrian universities, including all their departments and faculties, continuing to withstand the hardships caused by the violent internal war the country is living, placing their hopes on the youth who represent the future. Nashwan Abdullah, Telesur, Damascus, Syria.
The World Health Organization is urging countries to invest billions of dollars to tackle 17 neglected tropical diseases. Now, those include dengue, leprosy, and sleeping sickness. Those illnesses kill 500,000 people globally each year. The UN agency says some 1.5 billion people in 149 countries are affected by these diseases. They add that increased investment by governments in fighting them can alleviate human misery, distribute economic gains, and more evenly free masses of people from poverty.
This report makes the case for countries to generate their own financing for the control and elimination of the neglected tropical diseases. This will be crucial to ensuring that everyone has access to the same kind of public health coverage for these diseases, which have always been associated with poverty.
And on a lighter note tonight, legendary Britpop band Blur has announced the release of its first new album in 12 years. The 4 bandmates all reunited at the Golden Phoenix restaurant in Chinatown in Leicester Square to reveal to scores of gathered reporters and fans watching live online that they will release a new album called The Magic Whip. Blur's latest release will represent the first album the group has made as a foursome since the album 13, as it was called, was put out in 1999.
People who come to see us in the past know what we're like live, but on this occasion we also have a whole new set of things to kind of, you know, get excited about. So there'll be even more music.
We had some, what did you say, downtime.
Right.
We had a cancellation when we were out in Hong Kong. There was a cancellation elsewhere, in Japan actually. And so we thought we'd put a few days, 5 or 6 days, to good use. And we located a studio and took all our stuff there and decided to just have a play, really.
The quiet town of Ashbourne in the English Midlands has come to life in what is considered the world's oldest, largest, longest, and angriest football game. The game is played with a hand-painted, cork-filled ball, and the pitch is a no-man's land between 2 water mills, wow, look at that, which serve as the goals at either end of the town, about 5 kilometers apart. Now, the origins are thought to be in pre-Christian times when the head of an animal was kicked around instead of a ball. And we leave you tonight with the music of Simon Diaz, one of Venezuela's best-known singers who died exactly 1 year ago. His song sought to recover the folk traditions of the Venezuelan plains. Plenty more on those stories and others we reported tonight at our website, telesurtv.net/English. Until tomorrow, I'm Cody Weddle.
Me van a ayudar. Cuando el amor llega así, de esta manera, uno no se da ni cuenta. El carutal reverdece, el guamachito florece y la soga se revienta. Cuando el amor llega así de esta manera, uno no se da ni cuenta. El carutal reverdece, el guamachito florece y la soga se revienta. Caballo le dan sabana porque está viejo y cansado, pero no se dan de cuenta que un corazón amarrado, cuando le sueltan las riendas, es caballo desbocado. Y si una potra la sana, caballo viejo se encuentra, el pecho se le desgrana, no le hace caso a falseta y no le obedece a frenos, ni lo paran falsas riendas. Cuando estaba en el camerino, se me acercó una muchacha. Tío Simón, va a cantar el bicho. ¿Por qué le dices bicho? Ay, tío Simón, no venga con eso. Es un animal. Bueno, sí es un animal, pero ¿por qué le dices bicho? Bueno, vamos a hacer una cosa. Vamos a aceptar que sea un animal, que sea un bicho, pues. ¿Por qué me lo preguntas? Porque yo me la sé. Toda, no un pedacito. ¿Qué parte te sabes? Esa parte que dice, quererse no tiene horario ni mecha en el candelabro. Como yo sé que ustedes se saben esa parte, ella está aquí. Bueno, le voy a decir más, pues, está en este lado. Pero no la voy a señalar porque me va a dar pena ajena. Ella se va a asustar. No la voy a nombrar ni la voy a señalar. Ustedes la van a cantar conmigo. Cuando yo pare el conjunto, ustedes cantan ese pedacito para que ella se lo aprenda. Cuando el amor llega así, de esta manera, uno no tiene la culpa. ¡Qué belleza de coro lo están haciendo! Otra vez.